All right, it looks like we finally got some news out from Creative Assembly with Total War Warhammer 2, and it's actually not news about a DLC. It's about news for the new Proving Grounds beta that they're launching. Al Bickham put out a little blog post here, kind of outlining the overall ambition behind the Proving Grounds. What he kind of goes on to say is they didn't really deal with a lot of campaign balances in the last great patch, let alone the last great DLC. They were kind of saying like, listen, we wanted to really hone in and focus on making faster end turn times, so that's what they did. And as a result, though, they were saying that, because they've added so many legendary lords, so many units, so many races, everything, that it's kind of made the game a little bit of a shit show as far as balance goes. So what they're aiming to do with the Proving Grounds is test some experimental notions on how to change things from a player perspective and from an AI perspective. Right here it just says, to be crystal clear, we can't guarantee that any of the changes in the Proving Grounds will make it into the main game. So this video isn't on me talking about all of these sweeping changes that Creative Assembly is making. It's more talking about the Proving Grounds themselves, what their overall goal is going to be, and what the goals are going to be for this, I guess, first iteration or first run of the Proving Grounds. I'm not sure if the Proving Grounds is going to be their like working title name for anything that comes into this portion for testing, or if this is going to be the beta for the next patch, like, Potion of Speed was the name of the other patch, one other patch ago or so. So it's not who's to say is that if the Proving Grounds is just like what they're going to be calling this, or if it's the next patch name. So let's kind of talk a little bit more about what the Proving Grounds are going to be, what they're really going to focus on. So we're going to go through these goals, or this goal section here real quick. And I think this goal section is a pretty good one. It's a lot of things that a lot of people have brought up over time. So experiment with different difficulty settings, including game pace modifications, adjust game pace to align with shorter end turn times, but retain a game pace that allows for frequent activity like recruitment, construction, or combat every turn. Increase impact in recruitment and construction decisions, reduce the economy scaling into the later stages of the game. I think that's a pretty huge one. Add meaningful and stronger money sinks, keep campaign AI competitive, create an environment to possibly remove supply lines, which I think is one that everyone has wanted for such a long time. Reduce the strength of swift expansion, streamline factional differences in economy, and more clearly define faction uniqueness. Return public order to be generally more meaningful. Same thing with growth. Push late game units later into the game naturally for both AI and player. I think that one is so huge. And I apologize here, guys. My allergies are just slaying me. I live with 2 cats. It's allergy season. I'm dying. So this one is pretty huge because I think that a lot of people lament how so many of the units in the game are just kind of wasted once you get to that late game tech. And for some races, you can jump to it quite quick. If you get to those, the Blackguard of Nagaron as fast as you can, then you don't need to ever bother with some of the other cooler races or units, the Dark Elves. So I think that making it so that getting to late game units is a natural progression for the game versus you not maximizing and optimizing and min-maxing your approach to building out your units, I think that's a really solid way to kind of build the game around, because otherwise you have like 3/4 of your resources that go to creating units just being wasted because people aren't going to even use them in the campaign. So aim for more varied playthroughs and different late game challenges emerging naturally, and avoid hard restrictions. So looking strictly at these goals, I think a lot of them are really, really solid. I think they're really good, and I think they're ones that we've wanted for a long time. Remove supply lines. I think that's one that people have wanted for such a long time. Kind of dealing with how the AI, or keep campaign AI competitive. I know we all always say like, okay, the dwarfs and the greenskins are going to landslide the old world and the badlands. Like everyone knows that. Like it becomes a little too cookie cutter. So I think that they're trying to kind of curb how this goes. So a big thing too is the difficulty restriction changes. So they're going to change things from easy, normal, hard, very hard, and legendary to new, fast, standard, veteran, and legendary. And with that, you're kind of tweaking the pace of the game. We take a look at easy becomes new to Total War. That is what that is. The normal, though, becomes fast. a faster-paced total war with cheaper recruitment and construction. And each tier of difficulty increases recruitment costs, construction cost, and buffs the AI. With the last one here, which is pretty hardcore, right? With more expensive recruitment and construction, increased AI buffs, no quick save, and battle realism. So a lot of little tweaks there. Now, I'd have never really started up a legendary campaign, so I don't know if there is a quick save. So you guys can tell me in the comments below if I'm stupid and that's already there. But battle difficulty remains the same, even though the name's changed. Reduced public order penalties at lower difficulty levels, and reduced public order penalties based on hostile corruption at lower difficulty levels. So again, kind of making the game a little bit easier. And a faster pace game if you're newer to the game, and slowing it down as you kind of scale up to the harder difficulties. Increased background income for all major factions, and reduced background income for all minor factions on lower difficulties. And AI lords get additional experience based on difficulty. So I think as far as a first pass on difficulty or restructuring difficulty, I think this is a pretty interesting approach. I think it's kind of interesting that, okay, if I want to be new to the game, then the game's going to play quicker for me. And as I understand the systems and I get a better idea of how AI works and how the campaign overall works, then the game's going to become slower paced. I think that's a very interesting approach. I'm very curious to see how the execution is. If anyone wants to take advantage of this, of course, you can jump into the Proving Grounds now. And if you have any feedback, you can also do it on the official forums and on the Reddit. So I'll put a link to this in the description so you guys can get all up in the notes here and get links to those respective Reddits and forum links. But some other changes, though. So removed supply lines overall. Additional upkeep for all armies, the more armies the player has. And that they're not saying that there is additional upkeep. They're saying that is what supply lines is. So they've removed supply lines outright. There's nothing in its place right now. Removed building conversion on occupation, automatic conversion of buildings of a different race. So now it's just going to be an automatic approach. Income streamlined and adjusted. Added and adjusted resource buildings for all races to grant money. Adjusted direct income from buildings for all races, and reduced economy scaling in later stages of the game. I think this is pretty important because when you take a look at how each race approaches income, they've got a bunch of different income named buildings, and there's no real like baseline, like, okay, income is income, sure, that's your macro level, but the micro level for every race is drastically different. So I think that maybe their approach here is to say, okay, how do we create terms for income buildings that are game wide and not race dependent? So I think that's their kind of big focus there, and hopefully we'll get a better fleshing out of stuff like tradable resources and what that really means. That is somewhere on here. We'll take a look at it in a second. I can't remember exactly where it is in this list, but hopefully they'll delve deeper into that, because I think that's a big thing. It's a pretty enigmatic system, the whole tradable resource and how that truly affects your income. So I'd like to see that streamlined as well in this category. Growth rebalance, removed increasing growth on main settlement. This is the same thing for public order, so I'm just going to lump these two together. So there we go. Growth and public order rebalance. So they removed growth and public order on the main settlement chain, and they've adjusted public order on those buildings that exclusively focus on it. And building cost adjustment as well. So this one's kind of interesting. So low-level buildings are cheaper, and high-level buildings and main settlement chains are more expensive. I don't necessarily think that was the best approach. I think there needs to be a more of a gradual scale, because you go from like 1,500 to 6,000 on some chains. Exception, not exception. Greenskin's construction cost reduced. So that helps because a lot of their buildings were way overpriced, way overpriced. But I think that the problem is that there's too much of a disparity from low to high level buildings, and they've now increased that disparity depending on, I mean, if I'm reading this correctly. So low level buildings are cheaper, green building category. High level buildings and main settlement chains are more expensive. So in my opinion, I think that that should have been a better, more gradual scale and less of a larger gap between the two. Unit recruitment cost doubled, so that's going to really slow down the pace of your game. Upkeep of lords and heroes adjusted to match their strength and their mount option. So that's pretty interesting too. And the slave economy for Dark Elves has been balanced as well. So it's going to grow quicker, but it's also going to drop faster. Dark Elves slave capacity on settlements reduced, Dark Elf slave or public order penalty reduced, adjusted direct income from slaves, and removed post-slave percentage modifiers. Reduced slave decline reduction effects. I think for a lot of people, slave economy has been something that's just been broken since it was incepted with the game's launch. At the same time, too, it's one of the biggest strengths of the Dark Elves. When you kind of look at stuff like the Dark Elves, you think of stuff of like the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Kings don't have to rely on recruitment cost and upkeep. So it's a strength. Dark Elves, because the slave economy is so broken, don't have to rely on economy. So it's a strength. So it'll be interesting to see how this actually plays out in the game. It might actually make the Dark Elves, from a campaign standpoint, a lot harder to play if the slave economy is such a challenge. So we'll see how that really pans out. Chaos and Beastman unit upkeep reduced, Lizardman Salon building only available in major settlements, post-battle loot reduced, sacking income reduced, trade commodity value halved. So it looks like they're really trying to slow down that pace of economic growth. Like it stated earlier at the top, it was saying like, hey, we're trying to make it so you don't just landslide early with your economy, and it's just a snowball of, okay, what faction can I just destroy next with my powerhouse of 15,000 gold a turn? So that's a really strong approach, and I think it might be a little too hard and too heavy, too fast. We'll see how all this comes to play. I feel like the game might be a lot slower. I have access to the beta over the weekend, but I didn't touch it, unfortunately. So I'll be able to dive in this week and see how it really plays out. But base rogue army spawn rate is reduced, which is nice. And Angren, his initial upkeep penalty was reduced as well. That's also kind of nice. And Akai start setup was adjusted a little bit. Now, as far as the AI changes, there's been some decent ones here. Building adjustments to accommodate the above changes, of course. Malice AI will confederate less quickly and stay independent, which is good because they were just joining into the Dark Elf main faction Nagaroth immediately. Well, not immediately, but pretty damn fast. Offer to join war will not happen as often, thank God. AI doesn't remember diplomatic events as long as it used to, which is strong because you'd be having to deal with diplomatic penalties on something that you did like 60 turns ago. Reduced greenskins over aggressiveness. Vampires are now more aggressive. So that'll be interesting to kind of create a bit of a power struggle between the vampires, the dwarfs, and the greenskins. General diplomatic hostility towards greenskins has been reduced. Even AI unit recruitment improved. And AI further reduced focus on bad climate change regions, and some AI factions focus more on their home territory, which is pretty cool here. Now, another big one here is the auto-resolver. I think this is the first point's cool, auto-resolver bonus against non-playable factions, but this is the biggest one. The auto-resolver subsystem ensuring unit losses has been disabled. Units are now generally less likely to be killed in auto-resolved battles. And I mean, how many times did you have a battle that you didn't want to auto-resolve because you had a dragon at like 50 or 75% health and you didn't want to just get gibbed because the AI would just throw it into battle and kill it? So here, we don't have to worry about that as much, and I think this is, again, one of the biggest highlights of this entire Proving Ground. You could do nothing and just do this, and I'd be stoked on it. So the auto-resolver will hopefully kind of get a lot more tweaking during the Proving Grounds. So to get a kind of a better blowout of the campaign difficulty, we can see what you get for the starter difficulty from a player standpoint and from the AI standpoint. And that kind of expands all the way down here. So rather than going through each and every one of these, I'm going to talk about the starter portion, and I'll start about the legendary portion real quick. This is the entry level. This is supposed to be the fastest paced. It says faster paced, so maybe, what, we'll start here. Since this is normal. This is the faster paced Total War. So public order penalty, corruption, minus 25%. Same thing with recruitment cost, construction cost, and additional lord replenishment is 20%. So your lords heal a little bit faster is what it looks like to me. Unless it's trying to say it's lord, their army's replenishment is 20%. Now for the AI, they get a growth of 20, replenishment of 5, additional lord replenishment of 10%. So yeah, I would say that this is just lord dependent versus this just being the army. So the recruitment cost minus 50% for the AI, as well as construction cost, then global recruitment of 3 and local recruitment of 3 with Lord XP gain of 25. So this then scales, right? We lose all of our public order and recruitment costs as we jump into standard, then into veteran, and we get a higher upkeep penalty. Then the legendary, we get a larger upkeep penalty with additional Lord replenishment of 5%. Then we look at the AI, and they get a growth of 50. replenishment of 10%, additional Lord replenishment 20%, and recruitment cost minus 80% as well as construction. Local recruitment of 5, global recruitment of 5, local of 3, unit XP gain 400, Lord XP gain 50. So we should really see Legendary being a lot more difficult. It looks like 80% recruitment and construction cost reduction is pretty disgusting. And this gives you a really good exact idea of how the cards are stacked against you. And I think that this is a pretty good approach to the difficulty system. Even if they kept the difficulty system as is, if they didn't touch it, and they just showed you exactly what the AI gets benefit-wise and what you get benefit-wise, I think it's a level of transparency that'd make the game easier to approach from a new player's perspective or from a player who's returning to the game and wants to get better at it. I think that this whole entire campaign difficulty revamp is it's interesting. I don't think it's necessarily warranted, nor is it necessarily called out for in the community that I see. You guys might be able to speak against this, but it doesn't feel to me like the community was really clamoring for some way to completely change the difficulty. I think instead they wanted either a little bit more transparency or curb the way it works, have it more of a sliding scale rather than a drastic jump. And I think that could be the tale of what my feedback is so far on looking at the patch notes. Yeah, there's been a lot of tweaks and things that I think we wanted, but it's been too drastic. And I think this might be too different of or sweeping of a change. Now, again, I have not jumped into the game to see how this actually plays out. So take my feedback right now with a grain of salt. I'm just simply looking at numbers and how they possibly might affect your playthrough of the game. Jumping in, it might not really feel different. It might feel tighter. So we don't really know how this is going to play out until you actually get your hands on it. So reserve any kind of opinions on this until you jump into it. And with that too, we'll jump into the caveats and potential problems before closing the video out here. So this may contain setup errors, general copy paste errors, or miscontent. So of course, expect this. This is a beta. This is not a fully released patch or anything like that. Battle difficulty remains unchanged. Difficulty naming change not localized will not affect achievements. Scripted armies and quest battles balance not updated. Low quality army spam is a potential side effect. Rockwell save economy may be too erratic, like we were just talking about earlier. And then the Tomb King performance unknown, as they remain largely untouched. So we'll see how this really pans out. Jesus. This is just a beta, so if you want to get your hands on it, you can join the beta, see how this all plays, and see if it is a bit of a better improvement upon the Total War Warhammer system. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, go ahead and let me know in the comment section what your take is on all of these changes. And hopefully we will start to hear some news soon from Creative Assembly on the next DLC. But as always, guys, again, thank you so much for watching. Have a good one and take care.